Welcome, my constant reader friends. I'm Tad, and this is Tad Reads Books and Stuff. So today we're going to do a quick update on my reading so far through the month of March. As you know, we're still doing my Shorty King project. We are currently reading the Bachman books, 4 early novels by Stephen King: Rage, The Long Walk, Roadwork, and The Running Man. I am on The Running Man. What page is that? 531 in this book. So far we've read Rage, Long Walk, Roadwork. I've got The Running Man left. I'm going to be reading that this week. So next week, my next video, we will be talking about this. All right. Also, Leviathan Falls, Book 9, final book in the Expanse series. I am almost done with this. I'm on page 474, chapter 46, Tanaka, and we'll be finishing that. I may finish this tonight. Almost done with this. We will go over Leviathan Falls and, of course, the last short stories in Memory's Legion. The last story is The Sins of Our Fathers. We will be going over that, well, in 2 weeks from now. I want to go through the whole Expanse series once I get finished with Book 9. All right, this month really having a good reading month, finally. It's been a while. I finished Robert E. Howard, Bran Mak Morn, The Last King. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I had several people, when I showed this book off a while ago, I had a couple people comment that they'd like to hear what I think of particularly one of the stories in this book. So let's just go through the numbers real quick. This is Bran Mak Morn, The Last King, of course, by Robert E. Howard, illustrated by Gary Gianni. This book here is a compilation of the Bran Mak Morn stories. It was published in 2005, and my version has 376 pages. It is the hardback version. On Goodreads currently, it's a 4.03 rating. 376 pages, but really not. There are some sketches in the back that take up several pages. Also, let me find it here. So if you see, I'm going to try to hold it up. This first portion of the book is the short stories that have to do with Bran Mak Morn. Kinda. The rest of this book, really to make up a full book, is miscellanea. And when they say miscellanea, they mean miscellanea. There's all kinds of stuff in here that's kind of cool. We're going to go over this real quick. There's little stories in here where they talk about how he wrote some of the other stories. There's even some type printed pages of his original workings. He did like to edit. He took direction from editors, unlike his contemporary H.P. Lovecraft, who did not like them. There's also some, just again, short stories telling how he came about. There's fragments of letters in here. There's even a portion where you can see his writing. He often wrote on paper directly. There are letters in here, tons of letters that Robert E. Howard had correspondence with H.P. Lovecraft. So, I mean, if you're a fan of H.P. Lovecraft and don't know a lot about Robert E. Howard, you will know that they were contemporaries and very, very good pen pals. Wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters to each other, both expounding the virtues of each other's works and just telling them what they're doing, their progress. The cool thing too is, so not Bran Mak Morn, but Robert E. Howard, he published through Arkham House. And of course, Arkham from H.P. Lovecraft was where H.P. Lovecraft published a lot of his stories in book form. It was run by August Derleth, and S.T. Joshi did a lot of the editing for Arkham House. But Arkham House had a lot of writers that started out like H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard in writing in these zines, these magazines like Weird Tales and things like that. That's where these guys got their chops, where they really started writing, because they could write these stories quickly, get them published. You know, during the Depression, when people weren't making any money, of course, at least they were keeping themselves alive by pumping out these pulpy stories of all different types of things. Robert E. Howard, of course, you may know he wrote King Cole, Solomon Kane, Red Sonja, and of course Conan, along with Bran Mak Morn and other things. He was a big writer on boxing stories. Boxing stories were popular back in the 20s. So Robert E. Howard, though, was the type of writer that could, I think, write more widely than, for instance, H.P. Lovecraft did. And like I said before, he would take direction from editors, you know, change things. They would say, hey, if you wrote this or change this, and he would be willing to do that, where H.P. Lovecraft really didn't like that. But we're not talking really about H.P. Lovecraft. Oh, but I did want to show you something before we get into the stories. Let me show you something. This is just an excuse for me to show off one of my books. This is one of the prides of my collection, and this is The Horror in the Museum and Other Revisions by H.P. Lovecraft. This book I just wanted to show you was an Arkham. So this is Arkham House, and Arkham House, of course, published a lot of these writers. For instance, August Derleth was the big driving force, and the editor S.T. Joshi in these books. This book is really cool. This is a first edition, very hard to find. Only 4,000 of these were made. It is in perfect condition, and why it says The Horror in the Museum and Other Revisions is H.P. Lovecraft needed money. So he was oftentimes called in to edit or revise or maybe even downright rewrite stories for other authors. And this is a compilation of those short stories. It's great. I should stop talking about it, but I just wanted to show off this. This is one of the prides of my collection. Not easy to find, only 4,000 ever printed. So let's get back to Bran Mak Morn. So who was Bran Mak Morn? Well, it says the last king. Well, he was the king of the Picts. Now, if you have done any study in ancient European history, you will maybe have heard of Picts. I, however, have done a ton of research, historical research on Celts. If you notice my tattoo, this is all ancient Celtic iconography on my sleeve here. It's something that I've been studying most of my life, is ancient Celtic history. And the Picts, if you study ancient Celtic history, you will have run into the Picts. Now, the Picts that Robert E. Howard talk about in this book are not historical Picts. They are a creation of his. He calls them more Mediterranean. He describes them as very short, very dark, very feral type of men. However, Bran Mak Morn, their king, is a large man, I guess like myself, tall and big and strong. And he's the king of the Picts. Um, Robert E. Howard loves his history. I would say that he's a historical fiction writer. He throws a lot of history in his fiction. He throws a lot of fiction in his history. And a lot of his fiction is completely made up. Like how he describes the Picts in this book. However, he says that Bran Mak Morn is related to the original Picts of, the European, British area before it became known as Britain, of course. And so he's more of the original type of Pict, whereas the Picts that he leads are not. But pure fantasy in his fiction. Tons of fiction in here, though. I want to say, though, let's look at it again. Really, there are, I'll just read it to you. Where is it? Can't find anything today. So in the contents, you have a foreword, of course, an introduction. Then you have the Men of Shadows. It starts off with Men of Shadows, and Men of Shadows is a poem. But let me tell you, before we even get into it some more, my history with Robert E. Howard. Pretty much zero. Oh, when I was a young boy and I was reading, I actually started reading when I was very young, Sherlock Holmes. It probably was above my reading comprehension level, but I loved it. I read Sherlock Holmes. I went in, of course, to J.R. Tolkien, and I remember I was in a bookstore one day looking for something like J.R. Tolkien, and that's where I found Terry Brooks. I purchased a Terry Brooks book, brought it up to the counter. My mother had given me money to buy a book, and the guy said, "Oh, you like Terry Brooks?" Because I had grabbed the Elfstones of Shannara, which is the second book. And I said, "Oh no, I bought it because the cover looked cool, right?" So I put it up there, and he goes, "Oh, well, you need to probably start with the Sword of Shannara." But he didn't have it. He did have Elfstones. So I bought Elfstones, and he said, if you really like these kind of books, these fantasy novels, you should read Conan. And at that point, I had never even heard of Conan. And I said, "Conan? Never even heard about it." "Oh, you've got to read Conan." He goes, "Don't worry." He goes over and he gets a little paperback, a crappy, beaten up paperback off the shelf of his used section, and he gave it to me. So he gives me Conan, of course, Robert E. Howard. I bring it home. I start reading Elfstones of Shannara and flip out. I freaking love it. So I can't wait. Once I finish it, I grab the Conan, I start reading it, and it was god awful. I'm sorry, I hated it. Maybe I just wasn't developed in my reading to understand the writing style of Robert E. Howard at the time. But I really didn't like it. So I got rid of it. I gave it to a friend of mine. I don't even have it. And I never read any more Robert E. Howard. When Conan the Barbarian, the movies came out, and Red Sonja, I thought they sucked. I don't like them. I'm getting a little bit more mellow to them nowadays, the nostalgia of them. But I didn't even like the movies. So again, I never even got into reading Robert E. Howard. Eventually, I found Stephen King. Stephen King does nothing but talk about H.P. Lovecraft back in the day. So I started reading H.P. Lovecraft. And if you've read H.P. Lovecraft, you know it's not easy. He has his own cadence, his own style, his own path to lunacy that he writes. And it can be off-putting and hard to read, especially for young readers. Although, if you stick with it, I found that you just keep reading. Read. Eventually, you get in that flow with Lovecraft, and it, all of a sudden, your mind goes, and you love it. So, knowing that he was such good friends with Robert E. Howard, I purchased this a while ago, and the reason why I purchased this one, this is a compilation made by Del Rey, Valentine Books, and Del Rey also published Terry Brooks. So I said, you know, I'm going to look up Robert E. Howard, but I didn't want Conan because it'd been such off-putting to me. I decided to go with something that I knew a little bit about, Bran Mak Morn and the Picts, because I study Celtic history. So I got this years ago, still put it off because, again, it was Robert E. Howard, and I just didn't think I would like it. So I finally decided to read this, and it starts off with this poem, Men of Shadows. Let me just read to you real quick the first couple lines of this. From the dim red dawn of creation, from the fogs of timeless time, came we, the first great nation, first on the upward climb. Savage, untaught, unknowing, groping through primitive night, yet faintly catching the hint of the coming light. That's just the first two stanzas of this poem, and I was like, holy crap, I think I'm gonna like this. That is the opening poem for Men of Shadows, which goes into a short story, and it just goes from there. Men of Shadows, I loved it. The writing sang to me, his style, his pacing, the story, the way he blends fiction and history together, I think is brilliant. It's very visceral, very tactile. You can feel the things that are happening. His fighting scenes are excellent. His descriptions are very vivid and put you into these physically and mentally. Oh my gosh, I freaking loved it. Every single word, every single story. Men of Shadows is a great beginning for these Bran Mak Morn stories. They kind of start from, I guess, chronologically, the Bran story. So, but there's not that many. That's what's the sad thing. The really super sad thing of this is, so you start with Men of Shadows. Short story, 30 pages. Then you go into Kings of the Night. I loved it. This brings in King Call, who died centuries before he comes into being. This is where you'll first start seeing words like Rylea, which is a made-up place by Lovecraft. And the way he talks, he uses words that, like Stygian, you know, and things like that, that Lovecraft loved to use in his writing. So you can see that this fantasy is somehow tied to the Cthulhu mythos in a way. Aeons and space and time, and King Call just comes to the future somehow. Is he really there or isn't he there? But he bleeds, he says. So he must be real, or is this a dream? It's excellent. That's King of the Night. And then you have Song of the Race, which is another poem. And then we go into Worms of the Earth. Now, if you look at any other videos online, if you research Robert E. Howard, any of the other YouTube videos online, Michael K. Vaughan is the king of Robert E. Howard. Look up his videos if you want to learn more about Robert E. Howard and his writings. Michael K. Vaughan. I'll link, of course, his channel in the description below, but check him out. He knows much more than I'll ever know. But the Worms of the Earth. Worms of the Earth is a Bran Mak Morn story, but this is a horror story. So this is a lot of people's favorites, and a lot of people just say that it is one of the best pieces of writing of Robert E. Howard. I don't really know because this is all I've ever read. I liked it. Yeah, it's a horror story. It's pretty cool. Witches and hell and demons and throwing a stone into the middle of a lake. Arthurian, of course. A great story. Again, I don't know if it's his best. I haven't read that much. Then we go into The Dark Man. Now, The Dark Man is a Bran Mak Morn story. I guess it's more of a story, again, of the Picts. But they worship this stone effigy, and they call it The Dark Man, and it's of Bran Mak Morn. So you do get more stories, some interest in Bran Mak Morn. And then you have The Lost Race, which again is a story basically about the Picts and thousands of years into the future, things like that. It ends with a poem that is unnamed. The poem is great. Then we go into that miscellanea. So really, there's only, 188 pages of this book is Bran Mak Morn stories. And really, out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories, only 4 of them are really Bran Mak Morn stories. So there isn't that much. But they did fill up this book with other things. The miscellanea is great. There's a little story in here called The Little People, which again are more about the Picts. There's The Little People in TypeScript. Children of the Night is another story similar to, I think if I could find the picture. So in the beginning of miscellanea, you see these dudes here talking like they're in a men's club. Very kind of Lovecraftian type of story, where these guys are discussing different, what do I want to say? This one guy talks about how they've been studying witchcraft and just esoteric things, and something happens. I won't give it away, but it's just a short story, and it really doesn't have to do with Bran Mak Morn either. More, this guy goes back in time kind of thing and experiences a Pictish battle. That's all I can say. Then there's a synopsis of the Worms of the Earth. There's a draft version, more fragments, poems, letters, things like that. So really, only half the book is stories, and there's only 6 short stories. So if you have not experienced any Robert E. Howard, I think it's a great place to start because it's an easy read, and like I said, it's just so well written. Much easier to get into if you haven't read H.P. Lovecraft. It's a contemporary of H.P. Lovecraft, and apparently just a great writer that I was just too young to get into when I first tried to read Conan. Now it makes me think like, oh my gosh, now I got to just go buy other things. These versions by Del Rey are really cool, except this hardback version. It comes in paperback. It cracked down the spine, it's split, it's very poorly made. This hardback version by Del Rey is crap. It's very poorly made. The paper isn't good, the printing isn't great, but the writing is. So there are this other series that they did of Robert E. Howard. Of course, there's King Kull, there's Solomon Kane, there's Conan, and there's also, they did a 2-issue best of Robert E. Howard in this form. But I like to buy hardbacks if possible. But this is just, oh man, that's the worst thing about it, it was crap. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you see my enthusiasm for it. I enjoyed every single minute of reading these stories. It was just relaxing. It was great. I didn't feel like I was forcing myself to get this done so I could do a video or anything like that. It's awesome. I will be reading more Robert E. Howard for sure. All right, guys, I hope you kind of enjoyed this story, these stories of mine about my experience with Robert E. Howard and the Bran Mak Morn, The Last King stories. If you liked or find any entertaining value in this video, please like and subscribe. Also leave tons of comments. You know I love comments. And as always, peace out.